There are plenty of incredibly difficult and epic fights in the Monster Hunter series. A couple days ago, I talked about what I thought the hardest was. That got me thinking after I made it. What's the weakest monster in the entire Monster Hunter series? I don't know yet, but it's a question that I found myself asking. And since I thought it was an interesting question, I decided to go ahead and make a video on it. Now, when taking into account what the weakest monster is, I of course mean only out of large monsters. The answer would be far too easy to come up with. Another thing, when I say weakest, I do mean the easiest to fight for the hunter, and not comparatively to other monsters. So, the obvious place to start looking for the weakest monster has to be the first large monster quest in each individual game. After looking at the quest list for each of the games, the large monsters that start at the bottom of the totem pole are the Velocidrome, the Great Jaggy, the Great Jagruz, and the Great Izuchi. Why do three of them all have great in their name? I really don't know. Maybe that could be a question that we save for later. I also want to make it clear when it comes to the Velocidrome, I did not ever fight it in the original Monster Hunter, but I have fought it in both Generations and in 4. Anyway, since these are the 4 easiest monsters throughout the series in my opinion, we're going to go into a more in-depth look when covering them specifically. The first one that I would like to bring up is the Great Jaggy, which is the first large monster that you will fight in Monster Hunter 3. The Great Jaggy is a Velociraptor type monster that is bipedal. Now I want to break down some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Great Jaggy here. The strength include its pack of Jagus and Jagas, and it actually has the strongest pack of any of the monsters I've mentioned in this video. The reason for that being the inclusion of Jagas, or Jagias maybe, I'm not really sure guys. Jagias or Jagas? I'll go with Jagias actually, it looks like Jagias. Jagias are considerably more annoying than Jaggies, and possess a shoulder charge ability that has a pretty large hitbox for their size. It will always send you flying. Jaggias also do more damage and have more health than typical Jaggies. Their strength of the Great Jaggy is its speed. It's incredibly mobile, however, that's the strength of every monster on this list except the Great Jagruz. Honestly, that's where the strengths end for the Great Jaggy, and that is not a good sign. When it comes to weaknesses, there seems to be an endless amount. The Great Jaggy is susceptible to fire, water, and thunder damage. Not to mention the 2 weakest points on it are its head and its body. Basically, the only way not to hit the Great Jaggy where it hurts is if you target its tail, and that's honestly a pretty hard thing to do. Yet another weakness of the Great Jaggy is how it telegraphs all its stronger attacks. Its bites and slams are extremely telegraphed, and those are the only real moves that deal damage. The Great Jaggy is one of my favorite looking monsters, however, and since this is my list, I'm giving it bonus points for that. Not actually though, that was a joke. Maybe. Maybe not. The next monster I'd like to talk about is the Velocidrome. Now, Velocidrome is actually the very first large monster you should face in this series. However, like I said before, I did not face it until Monster Hunter 4, so that's the game I'll be basing its fight on. Velocidrome is, in my opinion, the second most mobile of all the monsters on this list, and jumps around for a pretty large portion of the fight, making it somewhat hard to hit. Now, besides its mobility, there really isn't many strengths to the Velocidrome. I mean, it has a pack as well, but I honestly think that it's that out of the 4 monsters we're picking from, it has the weakest pack by far. Honestly, at this point, I realized something. Deciding what the weakest monster is isn't really by going by each monster's strength, but more by what they aren't weak to. And when it comes to weaknesses, the Velocidrome honestly isn't doing too bad. It's only really weak to the ice element, and its head is its only weak point, which is a big improvement from the Great Jaggy, whose whole existence is basically a weak point. So, while the Velocidrome has almost nothing going for it, it also really doesn't have that much going against it. Not to mention, blue is my second favorite color, so definitely gets a boost for that. I also want to say, I imagine this fight was much harder in the original Monster Hunter series, or Monster Hunter game, compared to its difficulty in later games, so I just wanted to add that in there for all of you old heads that might be watching. Third monster I want to talk about is the Monster Hunter World's training dummy, the Great Jagruz. I don't know why it's called a Jagruz and not a Jagra. I feel like I'm talking about multiple, but that's another discussion for a different day. Anyway, the Great Jagruz's first appearance is in Monster Hunter World, and it's honestly the most unique monster on this list. It's the only one that isn't the raptor. It's more like a giant iguana, and honestly, big props to World for having their training monster be a little bit different than the rest. Anyway, the Great Jagruz is considerably bigger than the others, and honestly, in my opinion, has the most intimidating look by far. The Great Jaguar's strengths include a stronger pack than the Velocidrome and the Zuchi, and that's where the strengths end. The Great Jaguar is slow as hell, and by far the least mobile monster on this list. Not to mention, every single one of its moves is telegraphed to hell and back. It's also weak to both fire and thunder. Its only saving grace is that it seems to hit considerably harder than the other monsters on this list. While it's really easy to avoid its attacks, they're going to deal decent damage if it manages to land one in the early game. Now, that's really all I have to say about the Fat Iguana Boy. I identify with his fatness though, so he gets bonus points for that. Finally, we're down to the last monster on the list, the Great Azuchi. The Great Azuchi makes its first appearance in the newest game in the series, Monster Hunter Rise. I'm actually a pretty big fan of the Azuchi, and I think it's probably the most unique raptor-type monster in the series. The Great Azuchi actually has some pretty decent strengths compared to others on this list. The first one is its speed and mobility. The Azuchi can fly around the battlefield on its tail, and honestly has some very quick attacks that are hard to read for newer players. Besides that, it can also deal some decent damage with some of its bladed attacks. Now when it comes to weaknesses, it also has quite a few where it wouldn't be considered to be on this list. Both its head and tail are weak points, particularly the tip of its tail. The monster is always vulnerable to both water and thunder attacks. Anyway, that's really my whole summary on the Azuchi, and it's not getting a bonus because, I've already been too generous in this video, and it doesn't really need those bonus points because I actually consider the Great Azuchi the toughest monster on this list and only the 4th easiest fight in the Monster Hunter series. Now I also want to quickly eliminate the Velocidrome for weakest monster contention, since I really just want to compare our last two contestants, the Great Jaggy and the Great Jagras. The Great Jaggy, basically being weak to every single element, weapon type, and its whole body being the weak point, makes it have an incredibly strong argument to be the weakest monster. The Great Jagger's argument of being an incredibly slow monster with the most telegraphed moves in the game is also a pretty good argument. And then, however, I think that I have to give the trophy of the weakest monster, the easiest fight in the Monster Hunter series, to the Great Jaggy. The Great Jagras just hits too hard, as a lot of moves that have good spread. It's also not completely made of glass. One time, I had Cha-Cha fight a Great Jaggy without my intervention, and just watch, Cha-Cha ended up winning the round in 7 minutes. That right there was enough for me to decide what the weakest monster was. I lied. All this research and video was completely pointless, because Cha-Cha whooping a Great Jaggy's ass was the only evidence any of us really needed. Also, no, I don't have a video of this, because it was years ago, so I'm just going to insert a picture of Cha-Cha over someone fighting a Great Jaggy, and you guys can use your imagination for the rest. Anyway, that's it. It was a fun one to make, and I really enjoyed delving into the weakest monsters of the series. I also want to let you guys know to check out the description to find the links to the videos used in this video. Big shout out to everyone that made it this far in the video. I really appreciate a like or a sub, so dopamine in my brain can inspire to make me more content like this. Anyway, I hope everyone has a blessed day. Don't forget to interact in the comments below.